Did I jump scare you? Yeah, I bet I did. You coward. You make me sick. Your weakness is pathetic.
So, a while ago, I made a video talking about where to start with Batman. I went over different types of comics, movies, and animated films that you should start with if you're a newcomer. And that video came about because I saw this meme. I want to read this series. Where do I start? Comics. You start with Batman #1 from 2011, not to be confused with Batman #1 from 1940, Batman #1 from 2016, or Batman Year 1, manga, Chapter 1 bro. It was a funny meme, but it was also kinda true, because comic books have so many different runs, continuities, timelines, and elsewhere stories, or hell, even multiverse versions of characters, all from different writers and artists, that it can be very daunting for someone brand new to the character to know where to start. And so the basic premise of the Batman video was that if you were to take someone who has no knowledge of a character, what would you recommend to help get them acquainted? What comics, what movies, and what shows? We did it with Batman, and you guys enjoyed it so much that you wanted to do the same thing, but with Spider-Man. So I put out a post over a month ago, I gotta get better at staying on top of these things, asking you guys what comics, movies, and shows would you recommend to a newcomer, someone who has no knowledge of the character. And like I said in the Batman video, we gotta pretend someone like that actually exists. For the sake of the video, we're gonna pretend there is someone out there that is actually like this, who has no idea who Spider-Man is. But real quick, I actually made a goof in my Spider-Man post because I asked people to recommend some animated movies. But Spider-Man doesn't have many animated movies like at all, so I'm just gonna go ahead and ignore that. And so we're gonna stick to the comics, shows, and live action movies. Now, I'm not as well versed in Spider-Man comics as I am in Batman comics, so I needed the help of my heterosexual life partner to get his input on which comics and shows someone should start on. And of course, I took a look at all your guys' suggestions, and here's the list that I came up with.
I'm gonna put some dirt in your eye.
That's outrageous.
Stings, doesn't it?
Stinks.
Now, probably the first and easiest place to start is the original run from the 60s by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. I mean, it's a no-brainer really. You can actually buy collections online relatively easily that have all the issues reprinted and bundled together in one. And it is the OG Spider-Man, so of course it's the best place to start. But when consulting my life partner, he gave me other suggestions as well. And it just so happens that it's the same ones that many of you listed off too. First was the Ultimate Spider-Man comic run from 2000, which basically serves as a retelling of the original story, with some slight changes, but also it's a more modern version of the story. Instead of taking place in the 60s like the original run was written in, it takes place in the 2000s, which this run was written in. And I know there's a lot of people out there who like the world and universe in the comic to reflect a more modernish era. But let's go back to 1990 and talk about Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run. Todd McFarlane is the creator of Spawn, and in his run as Spider-Man, he brought in a slightly darker tone and some more horror elements with the villains that he faces off with. And on top of that, this is Peter Parker out of his teenage years and more into his adulthood. Also, the art style is pretty fucking cool too, so that's just a bonus. Now, the other two I saw mentioned the most were Nick Spencer's Amazing Spider-Man run from 2018 and Spider-Man Life Story, which is a more recent miniseries that came out in 2019. Although when I started looking into it, I saw many people arguing about them. Some say Nick Spencer's run wasn't anything special and pretty lacking, and as for Spider-Man Life Story, some really like the concept but not the execution. In Spider-Man Life Story, it follows Peter Parker's life for 6 decades, starting from the 60s when he first got his powers, and Peter actually ages as the story progresses, with each issue skipping forward a decade. An interesting concept, but just like Nick Spencer's run, I saw many disagreeing over the quality of it. Unlike Ultimate Spider-Man, Todd McFarlane's run, and the original run, which seemed to be universally praised by all fans. But I still wanted to mention them since I saw it pop up a lot. Now, I did see a few other suggestions, but the ones I just listed off were the more popular ones. But more importantly, the whole idea is to recommend something to somebody who knows nothing about the character, and serves as their introduction so they can learn more about them. Basically, it's their jumping off point. Oh, and I would recommend something from Dan Slott, but I'm blocked by him on Twitter, so fuck him.
My humble personage bows before your grandeur.
What's the occasion?
Now this next section is easy. I saw everyone say it. Spider-Man, the animated series from the 90s. And I mean, yeah, of course that's the default option because the show is fucking great. And besides just being well written and a lot of fun, similar to the Batman animated series, it does get pretty serious and mature at times, which is surprising because most people don't expect that from a children's cartoon. You also get to see a decent amount of the Rogues Gallery, and it's pretty cool seeing cameos from other heroes. But let's shift it to something more modern. We got the Spectacular Spider-Man show, which takes Peter Parker and keeps him in high school, with the idea that each season would be a different semester of school. It aired in 2008 but ended after 2 seasons in 2009 because of legal issues between Disney and Sony Pictures Television. So it only has 26 episodes, but regardless, people still recommended it. And one thing that many people liked about the show is that it pulls inspiration from several different Spider-Man runs and blends them together. So there's something there for everyone to like. These shows seem to be the go-to when talking about Spider-Man animated series. I actually saw some people recommend the Ultimate Spider-Man animated show, which was surprising because I didn't think many people actually liked it. I mean, personally, I didn't really care for it, and honestly, I really wouldn't recommend it. But really just give a shout out to that random Spider-Man show that aired on MTV in the 2000s. That was an unsung classic.
Years like a cat. I will shoot you like a rodent.
Thanks, Mr. Ditkovich.
This next section was really easy. 2 live action movies. Basically everyone chose the first 2 Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. And I mean, of course, why wouldn't they? The movies are really good. It covers the origin story very well, so you get the basics no problem. And in the case of Spider-Man 2, you get to watch one of the best comic book movie sequels. And the movies themselves aren't afraid to be goofy or silly. In fact, they kind of embrace it. So they both have that charm about them. Now, I saw some people recommend The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, I don't hate that movie like many others do, but I don't think it's as polished or well put together as Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. And of course, with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's a whole lot going on there. And in the case of the MCU Spider-Man movies, I don't think Spider-Man Homecoming is a bad option, but the same thing I said about Matt Reeves' The Batman applies here too. In both Homecoming and The Batman, it kind of skips the origin part and assumes that you kind of get the gist of the character, or at least get the basic premise. So with Batman, it kind of assumes you know that his parents got killed when he was a kid, then he grew up, dresses like a bat, and fights criminals. In Homecoming, Peter was bitten by a radioactive spider, so now he has all these powers. His uncle Ben died, so now he uses his powers to fight criminals. Both of the movies assume that you know what's going on, and that you get the gist of it, so they don't really have to go over the origin story really. And that's the main reason why I choose Spider-Man 1 and 2 over Homecoming as like introductions for newcomers, because it does go over these origins more thoroughly. Although I will have Homecoming as like an honorable mention. It's one of my personal favorite Spider-Man movies. Oh yeah, like I already mentioned in the beginning, Spider-Man doesn't really have any animated movies, except for Into the Spider-Verse. So it's really one of the only options, which is fine because the movie's great. Anyway guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, go and drop a like on it. And leave a comment and let me know, what would be your recommendations? What comic, show, and movie would you recommend to a newcomer who knows nothing about Spider-Man? And I'll give a nice big shout out and thank you to the channel members. If you're interested in becoming one, click the join button down below and check out the perks. And if they interest you, consider joining. Or not, it don't matter.
None of this matters.